We're going to analyze the standard, and this is part of a larger training, but we need some information about this standard in order to continue with today's training. So we're looking at KOA A3. On pages 1 and 2 of your handout, you can take some notes around this standard and the deconstruction of this standard. The language says decompose numbers less than or equal to 10 into pairs in more than one way. I'm going to pull up the companion document so that we can dive deeper into KOA A3. Let's begin by identifying the domain. OA is the first coding after K for kindergarten, and OA is our domain, operations and algebraic thinking. The second code is A, and that is your cluster heading. Understand addition as putting together and adding to, and understand subtraction as taking apart and taking from. You'll see another small synopsis here with vocabulary that will come forth in this cluster of standards and some notes for you as the teacher. So let's scroll down to KOA A3. We see the standard here on the left, and we'll see some information here to give us a little bit more understanding around this standard. Take a moment to read through this and identify some key learning that may come up in this standard. We see that students are developing an understanding of part-whole relationships, and they recognize a set of objects can be broken into smaller subsets while still having the same amount. There's going to be some decomposing and even some more composing. So the strategies that we may see or hear develop in this standard, for those of you who've worked in this standard, you know you're going to see a lot of number bonds because of the part-whole relationship, but we're also going to use objects and drawings. It's very, very important to note that students need ample experiences breaking apart these numbers. You can see this note here, and using the vocabulary and same amount as before they see those addition and equal symbols or even the equations. Let's identify the prerequisite standards or skills and strategies needed. Because you're kindergarten, you're not going to see any previous grade level standards, but you may see some standards that are taught in advance. KOA A2 is one of those, and it's listed right above there. We're also going to need to have some counting experience and one-to-one correspondence. We're going to need some exposure to putting things together and taking them apart, but then we also have students who are going to need to know how to solve addition and subtraction word problems. When we look for the component of rigor for this standard of KOA A3, it's listed right here for us. Conceptual understanding, because this is really the first time students have a very deep relationship of those part-whole relationships and breaking things apart in various ways. Step 1, we want to review the standards on our end-of-year rubric. We'll do this with our quarterly diagnostics throughout the year, but we're looking for those major standards and domains. So I'm going to pull up the end-of-year rubric, which you should have access to, and you'll notice that in the end-of-year rubric, we have those embedded standards that will take us straight to Achieve the Core's Coherence Map. So let's look at KCC A1. When we look at this, we know that there are no prerequisite standards. This is really the first time students are introduced to counting to 100 by ones and tens. You'll see some concurrent standards that we're going to teach around the same time as we continue to teach this and get mastery throughout the year, and a connection to future standards, including another kindergarten standard, but also some of our first grade standards. During our summer intensive program, we really do want to focus in around the KCC, counting and cardinality, but also the OA domain, operations and algebraic thinking. So when we see something that is listed in blue or yellow, we're probably gonna go ahead and just sweep that under for right now, unless you have time during your 10 days to go ahead and identify some acceleration around this. Many of you noticed that item 3 is a special Louisiana standard around recognizing nickels, pennies, dimes, and quarters. If you want to bring that in as something you do every day as kind of a bell ringer, that's great, because there's no real explicit instruction in Zurn around this standard since it identifies as a Louisiana standard. So step 2 is to review the data. I've pulled an Illuminate Matrix report for a school, a random campus, and I'm looking at the first 20 students. So this goes for multiple teachers on this campus. I just pulled the first 20 students. I've got my end of year rubric over here on the side, and I'm gonna start filling in the names of students who need acceleration for items 1, 2, and 4. Remember, I'm not really worried about item 3, although I might decide to bring in some recognition of pennies, nickels, and coins, just because I know it's something that they need in life and they will get to in first grade. So if I look at item 1, I can see that I've got a couple of red marks here. That means they missed this item. And you as teachers in kindergarten actually administered on paper and maybe in a one-to-one format and in small group. So you entered these items as correct or incorrect. I see AA, TA, and SB missed item 1, as well as HB and LB. So they're gonna need some acceleration around item 1, which they should have begun at 1 and counted to 100 by ones. So we're gonna work with those students around that. For item number 2, I only had 2 students miss this, so I'm gonna put AA and TA in that second one. They also struggled with beginning at 10 and counting to 100 by tens. Then I'm gonna go over to item number 4. Item 4, I only had 1 student miss this item, SB, so I put that person's initials there. They struggled with writing 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 correctly. When we look at this, we begin to ask ourselves, are there large group deficits? The answer to that is no. This group of kindergartners did pretty well. Only 5 out of 20 students need acceleration in item 1. Only 2 out of 20 students need acceleration for item 2. And only 1 needs acceleration for item 4. We'll dig into those a little bit deeper later in the training. We're gonna identify the need of students now. So we need to go back to the standard that we deconstructed, KOA A3. What level of rigor did we say this came from? We're gonna look at conceptual understanding. And if you don't know, go back to pages 1 and 2, and you'll see that conceptual understanding really is the foundation of this standard. So when we look at number 7 as being aligned to KOA A3, we know students are gonna have to decompose the number 7 using a number bond and then fill in the equation. So if we think back to the proficiencies we learned about, the only other proficiency that might be an issue would be strategic competence, because maybe they don't understand the number bond or they can't represent breaking that 7 apart mathematically in an equation. In continuing to identify the need, I've pulled some student work from an actual Caddo student for this item. Remember, they're supposed to decompose the 7 into 2 parts. I don't know this student, but this looks like a 3 and a 9. If you're the teacher, you may know that's how they write their 4s. If that's so, we still need some work in scribing the number 4, the numeral 4. But then when we look at their number sentence, it looks like we have maybe a 7, again, transpose, plus maybe a 9 over here to equal 8. Everything about this screams we need some work accelerating in the conceptual understanding. So So I may go all the way back to prior to this number bond, pull out some snack cubes, hand them 7, and ask them to break them apart. And let's just start working in that realm. I might even have a template of a number bond where they take that 7, put the 7 snack cubes in the hole, and then break them apart, showing that they took the whole and broke them into 2 smaller parts. Your kindergarten teachers, you know your students, you know what's needed. So let's just think about how we can provide that acceleration in a small group format for our students. Let's map out our focus for the 10 days of summer intensive program. For those of you who are not going to be teaching during this time, you're going to want to plot out maybe 2 weeks of intervention and acceleration using your DRDPK. And let's start with the counting and sorting because we know that's where we begin in Mission 1. So you can go in and map out your instruction for those first 2 weeks of acceleration around categorizing and sorting. So if we look here, the first week in July, I'm going to focus in on that counting and cardinality domain, KCCA 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that comes from Module 5. Of course, it appears earlier, but Module 5 is where I would like to start because we begin getting closer to that first grade mastery. In the second week, I'm going to continue a little bit with Module 5 in that first day, but then I'm going to go back into Module 4 and look at the operations and algebraic thinking standards. And then on that last day, I decided to go back into that MD standard and work on the recognition of coins, maybe bring in some real world application about coins because students love money. So LDOE has created some Accelerate materials for you kindergarten teachers. You'll see they're all around the Eureka Math sessions, and that's directly aligned to our Zern curriculum. A lot of the materials have not yet been refined and finished with creation, but they will be before the start of the school year. The intent of these materials are to be used the week before you actually reach this module in this lesson. So you're actually prepping your students for this core time. Let's take a look at what this looks like for you. You'll see your focus standards, and there are some prerequisite standards for those students who did go in through pre-K. We've got some vocabulary here, and they also include some virtual manipulatives or other links that you can access. There are always going to be notes for the tutor or the teacher that are here. And then you'll see that it's set up very, very much like your own Zern lessons with fluency and maybe some word problems, and then your concept development. I will tell you, when I saw this, I was like, what in the world are we supposed to do? Well, on your interactive board, you're actually able to drag these and create your 10 frame with those pictures. But because I'm not in interactive mode, I can't do that. So these materials are already there for you. You don't have to create any more intervention or acceleration materials. And they're broken up into sessions. In some of your Accelerate materials, you'll notice a Desmos activity. On page 7 of your handout, there's a link where it will take you to all Accelerate materials and a guide to set up your own Desmos account. If you log in with your Google credentials, it kind of creates the account for you. But LDOE has provided some slides for some of your kindergarten Accelerate sessions. And you'll notice that these slides look a lot like the Draw Its or the open-ended questions for Nearpod. So I can actually pull this up and I can see when a student draws a line longer than the marker. I get real-time student work and I can provide real-time student feedback. My line was not longer than the marker. Let me just pull that down a little bit. But this is a great interactive that you can use in a small group with one-to-one devices. So we know all the resources that we have available to us, but how are we going to use this? Let's map out our instruction a little bit tighter. I've got those 10 days listed out for my summer intensive program. And I know that I want to accelerate around KCC, B4, and B5. So I go to my year to glance on the scope and sequence tab, and I see that in week 33, towards the end of the year, when we want mastery, I'm getting those standards. So then I go into the fourth 9 weeks scope and sequence area, find that standard, and I begin looking at the missions and lessons where I have resources available to me. You'll see that I've already embedded some of those Accelerate LDOE resources for you in the Accelerate column, along with some illustrative mathematics tasks, and we continue to use the Khan Academy resources as well. There will be Nearpod still for you for enrichment and advanced learners, but anything listed here can be used for your instruction during that summer intensive program.